What does a relationship look like between a Type 1 reformer and a Type 4 individualist? Well, let's start off by talking about a few things they have in common. The primary theory that connects the 1 and the 4 is their movement of integration and disintegration, which is what these lines represent. Now, these movements symbolize a whole collection of shared traits between 1s and 4s that arise under very different circumstances and under varying degrees of health or maturity. So, starting with the 1, their movement of disintegration is to the 4. This typically looks like the 1's relentless inner critic, driving them into a depressed, moody, or melancholy state that can make them feel lost in a rather existential way that's fairly familiar to your average 4. On the flip side, the 4's movement of integration is to the 1. This looks like the 4 detaching their identity from their emotions and then stepping out of their fantasy life in order to make real responsible decisions that incrementally improve the quality of their life. All of which is pretty familiar to your average 1. Now, when the 4 is less healthy or feeling insecure, they disintegrate to the low side of the Type 2 helper, which can be another point of connection for this couple, as 1s can have a 2-wing. So, two very different theories colliding here, but the primary takeaway is that 1s with a 2-wing and disintegrated 4s are both very concerned about the stability and intimacy provided by their relationships. This can also make them fairly clingy or aggressive in their approach to those relationships, but we'll get to conflict later on. Also, I'm making criminally broad statements here for the sake of time. So if you want to learn more about this couple's wings or their movements of integration and disintegration, then please be sure to check out the complete guides that I've got linked in the description below. All right, the last shared trait I want to hit for this couple is in regards to their equally high standards. I once heard it said that 1s have perfect standards while 4s have elite standards, meaning that 1s are trying to avoid errors while 4s are trying to avoid average. So when this couple joins forces, they typically find a shared desire to do things that stand apart from or above what other people are capable of doing. Now, that can make them a bit snobbish, if not just hypercritical of their own work. But at the end of the day, this pair finds comfort in knowing that while they do things very differently, they're both equally focused on creating something truly meaningful with the unique package of skills, experiences, and standards they bring to this life. Okay, that's enough about what this couple has in common, which means it's time to zoom in a bit on what specifically attracts the Type 1 reformer to the Type 4 individualist and vice versa. Whenever a couple is connected via their lines of integration and disintegration, like the 1 and the 4, it can seem like the partner in the 4's position should naturally be more drawn to the relationship, as they get to see a bit of their best self reflected in their partner, whereas the 1 has to see some of their less desirable qualities reflected in the 4. However, I've learned from the wisest Enneagram teachers over the years that a sign of profound health and transformation is actually to embody the best traits of the type we go to in our movement of disintegration. So, theoretically speaking, for a 1 to embody the virtues of the Type 4 individualist would mean that even during their most destabilizing experiences, the 1 is able to transcend their ego's desire to ruthlessly control or condemn themselves, and instead, they learn to lovingly embrace all the broken, messy, or contradictory parts of their identity. And that's exactly what attracts the Type 1 reformer to the Type 4 individualist, who brings a far more open-hearted approach to their experience of both the light and dark sides of their identity and life itself. In fact, 4s, much like Bane, often find a greater purpose and beauty within the darkness, which is what then allows them to hold such a non-judgmental mirror up to the 1 so they can finally acknowledge and embrace their shadow side, if you will. This is honestly a huge gift to the 1, who is often so focused on moving towards the light of moral perfection that they forget the closer you get to the light, the bigger your shadow becomes. It's during these moments or seasons where the 1 is experiencing a troubling yet necessary disillusionment that the 4 is great at creating a safe space filled with empathy and warmth, where the 1 can finally come face to face with all their anger, grief, and often hypocritical nature. In this dark arena of increasing self-awareness, the 4 often feels right at home, as it's a space they've navigated many times before. And so they feel no need to hurry the 1's healing process or provide them with easy answers for their emotional pain or existential dread. Healthy 4s also demonstrate through their many creative acts of self-expression that the 1's fears and failures can actually become the best part of their life's work. After all, most people find a vulnerable struggle to be way more relatable and inspiring than if the one had somehow chiseled themselves into a pillar of moral perfection thanks to their unshakable self-discipline. Ultimately, the four demonstrates a fearless approach to self-discovery and self-acceptance that inspires the one to live into their most authentic and wonderfully flawed self. All right, time to switch gears and talk about what fours typically find most attractive about ones. The four's attraction to the one can pretty much be summed up by two key concepts within the Enneagram. The first of which is the Hornevian triad, which describes the way each Enneagram type navigates social relational situations. Ones are compliant types, so they're always checking in with their conscience to see if they're behaving appropriately given the specific morals, rules, or customs that dominate their environment. This makes the one live with a ton of shoulds that tend to overrule whatever emotionally indulgent decisions they may prefer to make, but can't seem to justify. Now, that obviously has its pros and cons, but in this context, the one's self-restraint often inspires the four to be a bit more responsible and considerate in their decision-making. The reason being that fours, as withdrawn types, are prone to looking inward at their emotions to figure out how they can make authentic decisions that adequately reflect their unique identity. While that's just fine when the four is healthy, it can often lead the more immature fours to spend a little too much time alone thinking only of themselves and not about the needs of others or the commitments they've made to their friends, family, or their work. Okay, that leads us to the second concept that can help explain the four's attraction to the one, which is their triadic pattern. As you'll see here, fours navigate life primarily through the emotions of their heart center, which they then stir up or even amplify with the thoughts of their head center. This then leaves the gut or body center fairly unengaged, especially when they're feeling a bit stressed or insecure. So when you mix all that up with the four's tendency to withdraw, they can often develop a pretty bad habit of isolating themselves and turning their bad mood into a bad day, into a bad week, into a depressing season of life. Thankfully, the one lives primarily from their gut center. And since they have their own disintegrated struggle with emotional turbulence, they often become well practiced when it comes to getting their work done, paying their bills, and even squeezing in a bit of exercise no matter how bad they feel. Ones as body types are also great at getting the four moving, not only towards their goals, but also just moving out of the house, which is a small yet very effective way to get the four out of their head-heart spiral. And to top it all off, the one's movement of integration is to the Type 7 enthusiast. So when they're secure, the four enjoys an equally pragmatic and playful partner who's great at making their life together an imaginative yet ever-grounded adventure. All right, I hope you enjoyed those points of attraction because now it's time to talk about what conflict looks like between ones and fours. Hey there, friend. Looks like you're a little more than halfway through this Enneagram relationship episode, which means it's a great time to not only watch this fancy little neon graphic float off into the distance, but to hit those like and subscribe buttons, you know? You know what I mean? You know those buttons that are sitting right there? Don't be coy, you know where they are. You know, if you're feeling non-committal, you can just hit the like button. It's still really helpful. Okay, let's get back to it. If you've ever played Whack-A-Mole, then you have a pretty good understanding of what conflict looks like between ones and fours. The four's dark emotions pop up, and the one's anger tries to bat it back down. Now, this repetitive interaction is often caused by a shared sense of frustration within both ones and fours, which is what's known as their dominant affect. This concept has a lot to do with childhood psychology and attachment theory, which gets very complicated very fast. So for the sake of time and simplicity, I'll just say that throughout their lives, ones and fours will often experience a somewhat constant and often unexplainable feeling of dissatisfaction. For ones, this affect manifests itself as a desire to fix, improve, or punish what's wrong within everyone and everything around them, and most of all within themselves. And for fours, it manifests itself as this desire to have what everyone else seems to have, which can be anything from success, fame, wealth, beauty, affirmation, or just emotional stability in general. So as you can imagine, this relationship is a recipe for some very volatile interactions, as you have one partner who's prone to unleashing their wrath on the perceived flaws of those closest to them, and one partner whose envious outlook on life makes them prone to over-communicating how flawed they feel. Again, Whack-A-Mole. And as conflict worsens, the one just becomes increasingly calloused from constantly swinging their mallet at the four's emotional reactions, while the four becomes increasingly numb to the pain caused by the one's relentless attacks. Now, if the 4 sinks deep enough into a hole of shame and self-pity, they'll start justifying all sorts of objectively bad behavior, which the 1 can then use to either justify all their harsh treatment of the 4 or finally choose to leave. However, many unhealthy 1s in a broken relationship with a 4 simply can't seem to find the exit, as they've grown very attached to projecting all their frustration in life onto their partner. Remember, unhealthy 4s represent the 1's disintegrated self. And so instead of owning their role in the relational dysfunction, they just scapegoat the 4 and paint themselves as the suffering saint. In fact, a big red flag in this relationship is when both partners start playing the victim, as the 1 can recall every hurtful thing the 4 has ever done to them, and the 4 begins to believe that they're just a hopelessly broken person who can't help but hurt the 1s they love. No pun intended. All right, since the 4 has probably stepped outside to light a cigarette and the 1 has started aggressively cleaning the house, I'll refrain from going any further and just say that there are plenty of things this couple can do to have a more peaceful, loving, and healthy future together than what I just described. So, on that note, let's wind things down with just a little relationship advice tailor-made for my 1-4 couples out there. The first piece of advice I've got for this couple is just for the 1, and it's to avoid trying to change the 4. I say that because 1s are often equally attracted to who the 4 is today as they are with who they think the 4 could be tomorrow. This is tied not only to the 1's restorative nature, which is always seeking to improve everything and everyone around them, but also because of what I said earlier about the 1 projecting their disintegrated traits onto the 4. And instead of fixing themselves or moving on from the relationship, they just hunker down and fixate on the 4's problems. So don't do that, especially if you're in the early stages of the relationship and you're already thinking, oh man, they'd be the perfect partner if only they did or didn't fill in the blank. Oftentimes, this looks like a big difference in your family values or religious beliefs, or worse yet, some drama in the 4's life in which the 1 would like to play the savior. All that to say, watch out for your self-righteous desire to fix the 4, as it can become like cancer in the bones of this relationship. Okay, my next tip is just for the 4, and it's to make sure that acts of service are one of the primary ways you show your love to the 1. 1s are people of action. And so they often need to see the love to believe it really exists within their partner. This can be quite a challenge for the 4, who lives in a world of intangible emotion and lots of inaction. 4s also tend to lean heavily on words of affirmation, not only because it's a way to genuinely express their emotions, but also because it doesn't really take a lot of physical effort. So it'll really help the 1 feel loved and like they're in a mutually supportive relationship if the 4 can take on a few household responsibilities without being asked. And then when it's the 1's birthday or your anniversary rolls around, to put some of your immense creative energy into doing something truly memorable for the 1. And then if you want to write a beautiful card full of poetic musings about the depth of your love for the 1, then I'm sure they'd appreciate that too. Okay, my last piece of advice is for both partners, and it's to practice wiping the slate clean every once in a while. By that I mean, this couple really needs to express and then release the narratives they're holding on to about each other, as the 1 is prone to holding on to every time the 4 has behaved badly, and the 4 is prone to holding on to every time the 1 has made them feel inadequate. While this is definitely something that can be tackled within the safe structure of couples counseling, I'd also just recommend going off into nature to have these intentional moments of reconciliation with each other. The reason being that 1s and 4s often feel more open and at ease when they're surrounded by the natural order and beauty of creation, rather than feeling stymied by all their familiar routines and hiding places at home. All right, I will pause the advice there and say that I hope it was helpful, especially since it's time to end things with the least helpful part of this entire relationship series, which is with the patented YGAT relationship rating system. First up on the YGAT relationship rating system is the spice meter. And I'd say the 1-4 combo is definitely on the muy picante side of things, given the fact that 1s bring enough critical anger to constantly ignite the 4's emotionally volatile reactions. And also, the 4's more indulgent nature often gives the 1 plenty of permission to tap into their more naughty side. So yeah, let's go with about an 8 out of 10. Next up is the power meter, and I'd say this couple is definitely somewhere in the productive range, as healthy 4s can mix their artistic vision with the 1's natural ability to get shit done, which means they could create some pretty profound stuff. Also, 4s can have a strong 3-wing, which then makes them even more concerned with having a successful public image. But yeah, for those reasons, let's go with about a 6 out of 10. That leaves us with the fun meter, which is really dependent upon how secure this couple is feeling, as 1s can be quite adventurous or playful like 7s, and 4s definitely love themselves their escapist activities. But since they both have a penchant for more serious introspection, I'm gonna put them at an ironic 4 out of 10. All right, folks, there you have it, the Enneagram 1-4 relationship. A couple of hot and bothered bedfellows striving to create the most meaningful life imaginable. Best of luck, you two. It's gonna be a hell of a ride. That's a wrap on this Enneagram relationship episode for the Type 1 Reformer with a Type 4 Individualist. If you're shutting it down here, then I will say thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then please do me a tiny favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons for me on your way out, if you wouldn't mind. But hey, if you're sticking around for more Enneagram goodness, then you know I've got plenty of relationship-themed content for you to choose from right here on the screen, as well as some more lighthearted content if you need a break. Take your pick.